Hi, how are you? This is Sandstorm here, and welcome back to Hearts of Iron 4. It has come to my attention that most of the Hearts of Iron 4 content on this channel exhibits an ahistorical playstyle, exploitative strategies, or ridiculous and unrealistic outcomes. So while this is fun, there is another playstyle available in Hearts of Iron 4, that being playing the game in the way it was intended to be played. So today we are going to be starting a new Sandstorm Academy series. This is importantly not a tutorial series, but will instead be discussing strategies and topics relating to historical games, assuming that the viewer has a prior understanding of Hearts of Iron 4. This will be utilizing short-form content, with each episode focusing narrowly on a specific subject in a broader category that will flow chronologically down the production line of Hearts of Iron 4. So without further ado, let's begin the first episode. So the first category that we're going to begin discussing is the economy. More specifically, today we are going to start discussing factories. So what factories are the bulk of the national industry. They are a measurement of national power used to indicate status, and they produce most things that you need to fight in a war. With Hearts of Iron 4 being a war game, this is especially prevalent. So there are two types of factories, as we can see from our counter up here. There are military and civilian factories. So civilian factories produce buildings, and we can see their tab over here by pressing T or clicking on the construction tab and seeing all the possible buildings that these civilian factories can construct. And military factories, the production tab by pressing Y, produce material or military goods. So you need civilian factories, as you may notice, to produce military factories, which is very important. So if you want to increase the capacity for production of military material, you will need a large reserve of civilian factories to produce more military factories. Therefore, a balance between the two is important so that a strong civilian factory and military production base can be established before your nation enters World War II. Starting as a major nation like Germany, as we've started, we have 69 factories with 28 military factories and 31 civilian factories. This is a good base to start from, but we are going to need to build up a lot more before having a full modern functioning economy entering World War II. So, building only civilian factories in this queue. If we queue up only civilian factories and build nothing else before the war, this is not viable because you will not have a large enough industrial base to produce military equipment. As you can see, we do have 28 military factories, which is good for more minor nations, but as a major nation like Germany, we would want to have a lot more military factories to be able to bulk up our military reserves before entering the war, so that we can have more equipped divisions and more divisions out in general. Building only military factories is not going to be viable, because if you build a mix of civilian factories and then build military factories, you're going to end up with about the same amount of military factories as you would if you were to only build military factories starting from now. And if you were to build civilian factories and then military factories, you would have an additional large base of civilian factories that you can use to construct more military factories once the war begins. So you almost always want to start by building civilian factories, as I've mentioned, and you will want to switch to a certain point to military factories. So this point will be determined by the point of entry of the nation that you are playing into the war. Usually a good rule of thumb for the three major entry points: for 1939, you will want to build only civilian factories until early 1938. If you're entering in 1941, you will be wanting to build factories until around 1940 or until World War II starts, which is supposed to be historically in September of 1939. And if you're playing over in Asia, like Japan or any of the Chinese nations, you will want to be building a mix of civilian and military factories from the start, because you will be going to war in 1937. As you can see, this does reflect the historical industrial bases of the nations that joined the war, because the two titans of industry that joined the war in 1941 will have 2 extra full years to produce more civilian and military factories, and therefore increase their output exponentially compared to the nations joining in 1937 or even in 1939. And it was the Soviet Union and the United States, these two nations that joined much later in the war and had much more time to prepare industrially, that did eventually change the tide of the war. Another important partner of production to mention when talking about factories and construction is resources. Now, resources are required for military production. Many nations do not own large amounts of most resources, so we'll have to trade with other nations for a lot of these resources. Just taking a look around on the resource map, we can see that many nations in Europe are bountiful in steel and some aluminum around. Not much oil around in Europe, but we can see down in Southeast Asia there are very large reserves of rubber, oil, aluminum. These are resources that are integral for the war effort production of many nations across multiple fronts of production like air, land, and naval production. Some nations entering the war, especially like Germany and Italy and other Axis nations, will go to war with major trading partners like the United Kingdom and other European colonial empires that have colonized these regions that have large amounts of resources. So, under the construction tab, 2 important resources for the war can be synthetically produced with a synthetic refinery, these being rubber and oil. So an extra phase of synthetic refineries within this military and civilian industrial buildup will often be necessary, especially for nations like Germany or other Axis nations as mentioned earlier, who require that extra boost of resources to keep up their major amounts of production when at war and therefore unable to trade with these large trading partners that have large amounts of integral resources. What I would recommend for a nation like Germany is, after switching over from civilian factory building, which would be ending at the beginning of 1938, to build a few months of synthetic refineries so that there is a good base of resource production in place for when Germany is embargoed by those with larger navies. It's also important to note what switching over factory production looks like. For example, if this was the beginning of 1938 and I wanted to switch over to building military factories, what I would not want to do is delete the factories we have in the queue and maybe already partly produced. What I instead would want to do is queue up military factories. If I had more civilian factories in the queue that had not been built yet, say down here, or that were ahead of these military factories, I would want to delete those out because no production has been started on them. But you never want to waste production, and you always want to make sure that current production always finishes before switching over. As we can see, the production of these civilian factories are now coming to an end, and the construction effort is automatically being switched over without deleting any production effort onto these military factories, which is the optimal outcome. So now that we know the optimal order in which to construct factories to build a thriving economy, it's good to know how to increase the speed of this factory construction. So there are 5 main factors to factory construction speed. These 5 being infrastructure, civilian factory number, export law, research, and country bonuses. Infrastructure is fairly straightforward. As you can see, when we are building a factory on the construction tab, the percentages over all these states are the percentage of infrastructure in each state. So the higher the number, the better it is, and the better the state is that you want to build these factories in. So you want to target the states with the highest numbers of infrastructure. So 80%, we will queue up a number of factories there by holding shift to click by filling up the amount of building slots possible. As we can see here, when looking at the factory construction speed, we have state infrastructure times 1.8. So since we have 80%, it's 1 plus however much infrastructure here, which will increase up to a maximum of 2 times the construction speed if we have 100% infrastructure in any of these provinces, as compared to building in a 60% province. We would have only 1.6 as a modifier. This one will be complete on the 3rd of September, whereas if we were to assign all the factories to this one, it will be complete on the 12th of September. And although this is only a 9-day difference, this can add up when you're building a lot of factories. It's also very important to note that you should not build infrastructure first, because the effort used to construct infrastructure is not worth the bonus that is added onto the building. So you just want to build buildings in previously existing infrastructure zones. There are also going to be national focuses that will increase your infrastructure in certain provinces, like the Reichsautobahn. We will get maximum infrastructure in Brandenburg, Hanover, Thuringen, and Franken. This means that we will get 100% infrastructure there, and we will want to build our civilian factories and military factories there. Alright, the next main factor for construction speed is the actual number of civilian factories that you have available. So right now we have 35 owned, and we have 34 in use. We have 15 in use here, 9 out of 15 used here. The maximum amount you can use on one construction is 15. with construction speed increasing incrementally with the amount of factories up to 15 that you have. And then once you go over 15, they will start building another construction simultaneously. So you will notice that a number of our factories are being taken away for consumer goods. This says 16% of our number of military and civilian factories will be used to produce consumer goods. So these are actually civilian factories which are going back to the civilians in our nation and producing things for their needs. But since this has no equivalent or representation in the game, this effectively means that these civilian factories are locked out of use. You always want to make sure that the consumer goods percentage is as low as possible, and this is mainly done by changing the mobilization law. Mobilizing it further will give you less consumer goods percentage. Right now we're on partial mobilization, which as you can see gives 25% consumer goods. And further increasing stability will also change this. Currently our stability level is giving us minus 3.4 consumer goods factories percentage. Third build speed factor is also fairly straightforward, which is the export law. This can be changed under laws and government here. And it can go from free trade, which gives extra 15% construction speed, down to closed economy, which gives 0% construction speed, increasing incrementally throughout the 4 laws by 5% construction speed, the freer your trade law is. The issue is that free trade will give away more of your resources to the market, which means that you will often have to pay back civilian factories to trade with other nations to get back those resources. For nations that have very few amounts of resources, this construction speed modifier on free trade is basically free, but for nations that have a larger reserve, it's often better to cut down to limited exports or closed economy, especially during wartime. Research can also greatly impact the construction speed factor. As we can see under the industry tab, there is a line called construction, with every research giving an extra 10% bonus to construction speed. This is very powerful and should always be researched at or ahead of time because of the importance of these researches. Processing researches over here also improve the resource output of synthetic refineries, along with fuel refining, giving an extra 10% fuel gain from refineries, oil processing giving 50% fuel gain from refineries, and rubber processing giving an extra 1 rubber for every synthetic refinery. The final factor to improving construction speed is country bonuses. These come in 3 categories, the first being bonuses from national focuses. There are many national focuses that will provide bonuses to construction speed, industrial research speed, or directly grant factories, and a reduction in consumer goods. So usually there will be an industrial portion of a country's national focus tree. As you can see in the German tree, it's over here with a number of industrial focuses like autarky, giving a number of research bonuses, 4-year plan giving more research bonuses, and number 1's over here giving straight additions to your industrial base by providing extra 6 factories here and another 6 factories there. Switching over to the generic focus tree, we can see we have the same thing under the industrial effort. We have extra bonuses for industrial research, and then a large boon to industrial capacity by straight adding 2 civilian factories from these focuses, a few military factories from these 3 focuses, and then extra bonuses to industry, construction, and research. These focuses are good to get done early on because the quicker you get these construction bonuses, the quicker you will be able to build up your industry. The second category of country bonuses is political advisors. There are some political advisors that increase factory construction speed or reduce consumer factories percentage. As we can see on Germany, we have a captive industry here. It is locked behind a focus, but it does give an extra 10% civilian factory construction speed. And we also have a war industrialist, which will give us an extra 10% military factory construction speed. So it's important that you switch over from the civilian factory advisor to a military factory advisor when switching over from building civilian factories to military factories if you have both of these advisors available, because you don't want to be wasting the bonuses. The third category of country bonuses is the industrial concern. So the industrial concern for Germany, Krupp, will give an extra 15% industrial research speed, which, if we apply this, has decreased the time of construction research by a number of days, which is very helpful, especially when trying to rush through these researches early on to get a large bonus to construction speed. A few miscellaneous notes about construction speed. First thing is that a high manpower conscription law will negatively impact your construction speed. So once you get to service by requirement, you can see that there is a extra 10%, minus 10% construction speed debuff. Then this goes up to 30% and all the way to 40% if you are on scraping the barrel. So these would be extreme cases anyway, where if you might be on a very high conscription law like all adults serve or scraping the barrel, you might have other problems other than construction speed. And going down the conscription law does not give you any bonuses either. You can also convert factories by pressing this button here on the construction tab or by clicking on a state and then clicking this button here to convert. But I do not usually do this and would not necessarily recommend it because I think it's still good to have a base of both military and civilian factories and not to convert most of one to the other even during war or peacetime. Alright, now I'll show you a quick demonstration of how all of these factors impact construction speed. So what we're going to start with first is an extreme example. For this we're going to need to use Oman because they have a one infrastructure province, meaning that they only have 20% infrastructure in their region. So we now have our export law set to closed economy. We have our conscription law all the way up on scraping the barrel. We have no bonuses from country bonuses, research, and we have infrastructure set to the minimum. If we build a civilian factory here, we will see that it's going to take until the 18th of December 1936, even with 15 full factories working on constructing. So that was a bit of an extreme example. Let's set the laws back down to a reasonable level, an average level for the start of the game. We still have no bonuses except for infrastructure. Let's build in a 60% province, and that is going to take us until the 26th of August 1936. Just changing around our laws took off a number of months from our construction speed, even without any construction related bonuses. So now let's stack all of the bonuses up to maybe create a realistic 1939 scenario. We have war economy, free trade. We've researched the first 3 levels of construction, and we now have an advisor for captain of industry. We also have another country bonus here as a national spirit, autarky, and we have completed the Reichsautobahn focus, so we can build a factory in a 100% infrastructure province. Now this is only going to take us until the 15th of July, which is only 1.5 months from the current date, which is an extreme improvement from finishing the factory by the end of the year. As you can see, if we were to build a bunch of factories right now, this would make a huge difference as we would really snowball our factory production with all of these bonuses. Even with only 6 factories assigned, we're still going to finish by August of 1936, which is still a few months sooner than 15 factories on a very low infrastructure province with no bonuses whatsoever. So industrial bonuses are very important and should not be ignored. Anyways, that brings us to the end of today's episode. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you have a better understanding at how to maximize and improve your economy in Hearts of Iron 4. So be sure to come back for our next episode, where we will continue discussing historical strategies in Sandstorm Academy. Goodbye.